Hi, friend, Niclas here, and welcome to another episode. I hope you're doing well. On the show today, we have the keyboardist from the band Dream Theater, Jordan Rudess. And it was a huge pleasure being able to sit down with Jordan for an hour or so, talking to him about music, music theory, piano playing, Juilliard, and much, much, much more. So I really hope you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. And even though I wasn't an avid listener of Dream Theater growing up, I had friends who were pretty, pretty into them. I was always aware of their skills as musician and songwriters. I mean, they wrote some long ass songs with some very intricate parts, and they're awesome at what they do. So it was really cool being able to talk to Jordan, and I really hope you get some value out of this conversation as well. And before we get into the conversation with Jordan, please hit subscribe to the channel, hit the like button if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe as well, leave a rating as well. Your support really matters, and the channel is growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you. And also, if you want to get exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just enter your name and email address, and you had joined the Audio Tribe email list. It's obviously free and super easy to do. Again, name and email address, and you have joined. But that's it. Let's get into the conversation with Jordan. So please enjoy.
Hey,
Hey, how's it going? You can hear me?
yes, I hear you fine. You hear me
Awesome.
okay? Good,
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay,
Love
got
your
it.
background. Love your background, man.
Oh, thanks. It's my huge modular synthesizer.
Yeah.
Always makes a good background and also makes a good sound.
Is it a Moog or?
It's made by a company called synthesizers.com.
Oh yeah.
They do some amazing work. It's kind of like a Moog, but think of it as a Moog with like brand new parts and, just kind of rethought a little bit.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I love modular synths. I'm just trying to get into it myself. Like I want to have my own like modular like I don't know what you call
Cool.
it, like to build
The,
it, build a package. You
the
know?
Euro rack kind of thing is
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Exactly.
right, right. Yeah, a lot of people are really getting into that for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
you could try some of it on software before you even jump into the hardware. They have
yeah.
some
Exactly.
nice software packages that let you play with the modular space.
Mhm.
Yeah. So where are you located?
UK. Just moved to Leeds from London a few months ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you been to Leeds?
Yes, I have. I've been all over the place in this world due to my touring life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you think about Lisa? Have you played at the stadium here or some other venue?
I don't really honestly remember. I know that I've been there, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. To tell you the truth, it was years ago.
Right, right,
I-
right.
I'll have to do another visit to be refreshed.
Yeah, it was definitely before the pandemic, I assume.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brought you there? Like work or?
Well, I'm from Sweden originally. Moved to London 7 years ago to work in music to study audio engineering, which I did, and then worked as a sound engineer for a few years till the pandemic really hit, you know.
Hmm.
And then me and my fiance always talked about moving to Leeds, and the pandemic just sped that whole process up.
Right. Yeah,
You
I
know,
guess.
like for so many people, I
Sure.
think.
Getting out of the
Yeah.
cities is right.
Do you
Totally.
see that happening too? You're based in New York, right?
Yeah, but I live in the suburbs, so I
Right.
saw people, all of a sudden everybody was buying homes all around me. Real estate was going quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really really hard to stay in the city during the pandemic,
Mm.
right? It's much nicer to be out in surrounded by trees.
Exactly. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So yeah. So tell me more about what you were doing. So you were studying audio engineering and then working, and then what's your job now?
Well, since the pandemic hit, because here in the UK, we've been really fortunate to get like a government grant. I
Yeah.
think we're in the fourth, maybe fifth even. There will be a fifth, I think, in a few weeks or months or so. So being able to live off that and actually learning more about software development, doing some
Oh,
courses on that, and just actually practicing piano. That was
oh, wow.
that was one of the things I started
Nice.
learning. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right, right.
Um,
Good, good.
how's the pandemic been for you?
Well, it's starting to feel like getting back to normal
Right,
now, which is great. I started to do some solo shows, and
nice.
just things are opening up a bit. The
Right,
population is about 50% vaccinated, so everybody's starting to feel a little easier about things.
nice.
But there's still restrictions and stuff. Like when I did my solo piano concerts, they only allowed a certain number of people into the venues. It was all you had to be somewhat separated.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely see it's coming back.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's really good to hear.
yeah.
I was talking with some people from New York, and they were telling me a lot of small, like legendary venues have been closing all around New York. Is that the case, or?
I'm sure they have. I haven't been in like completely
Right, right,
in
right.
touch with seeing which ones are closing, and which been it's kind of busy in my own world, I guess, making
Yeah,
music and stuff. And right, I
exactly.
hope not too many have closed. Yeah, I don't know exactly.
Hmm. You know, as I was doing my research about you a bit, I discovered a song, and that's actually something I want to learn more about. But I was listening to Bach, or however I pronounce it correctly, Bosch, maybe is it Bach?
Bach,
Bach. Is that how you pronounce it
B-A-C,
properly?
the composer Bach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bach.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know how
I
this.
wasn't too sure if I pronounced it correctly, but yeah, Bach.
Yeah, close
Anyhow,
enough.
oh,
Bach.
yeah. I was
Like
listening to
you got a
the
bad Bach.
yeah. I was listening to Prelude in C because I know that's a song you studied when you were 8 or something to get into Juilliard, which was just mind blowing to me that you even were in that position when you were 8. Like, how did that happen?
Right, right. Yeah. So, well, I was studying as a kid with one of these teachers that comes around to the house and does the general lesson, teaches you out of a little red book how to read some notes and everything. And then when my parents kind of figured out that I was a little bit talented at doing this, they took me to a more serious teacher whose mission in life was to get me into Juilliard.
Hmm.
So that's what she prepared me for, and then I started at Juilliard when I was 9, and I stayed there until I was about 19, and then I left to go play rock and roll and electronic music and all the other stuff.
But how the hell do you get into Juilliard when you're only 9? Like, I mean, that takes some serious skill, I guess. I mean, how were you born like naturally gifted at
Well, when
piano?
I got to Juilliard, there were kids that were my age that were writing operas. I mean, it
Wow.
was a place for young, focused younger people. There's a lot of kids around that age, so it wasn't really that unique in a sense. Although you could look at it from another perspective and say all the people that were going there were unique, which is probably kind of the case. But you realize that people do get started early, especially a lot of the Asian cultures. They'll get people like young people practicing very seriously, and they were sending them over to the States to study at Juilliard and train. So.
I mean, how was that being such a young kid? Was it really toxic? Was it a lot of like bad competition between the students, or what was the vibe?
Um, it was a very serious, very um, focused kind of vibe. Uh, there was a lot of camaraderie, if you will, with the students. There was also some competition. Yeah, definitely, because we would literally have competitions,
Oh yeah.
like piano competitions where you'd be competing against your friends. But we were also young also, so it was a little bit different. That kind of the feeling when you're 10 years old or 12 years old and you're in a competition is different than if you're like, 17, 18, 19 and beyond, and you're competing. This kind of the feeling is different, I'd say.
Right. And was there any kids that ever, maybe if they lost, were there any kids that took it so bad that they just quit
Right.
or?
Um, I don't remember hearing about anybody who just plain quit like right there and then, but there were people who went through the program and then eventually got into other things.
Right.
Like I remember going to school with one fairly talented pianist who was also like my age, but when he got to be, college level, whatever, he said, "You know what? I don't want to do this anymore. It's just not for me."
Hmm.
I think that lifestyle, Juilliard kind of like intensity, it shows you what's kind of like required to be in that space. And then you realize maybe this is, some people realize this is not something I want to do, especially because the return of being a classical musician is not necessarily easy or not necessarily that lucrative unless you're become, part of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra or some of the small jobs that are not small, but some of the rare jobs that are out there. And for a pianist, well, then, hey, what are you going to do? You're going to become a concert pianist, right? Or teach. So there's a lot for people to think about.
Right. And what was your goal? I mean, did you even have a goal when you were 9 as to why you wanted to go there, or was it?
I just, yeah, I just knew that I wanted to play, and I've always known that this is what I want to do. This is kind of who I've always been. It's what I've always done, and I've always just followed through with that. And I never thought about it from any other real perspective. Like I wasn't thinking about it from a business perspective at all. I was just saying this is my focus in life, and then the business side of it just kind of was something I needed to kind of figure out at some point and tie into it because, hey, you got to survive. But I was never doing music for any kind of financial business reasons. That was a whole different side of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like you said, you need definitely both at some
Right.
point.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Right.
Definitely. But something that I find, like in my very, very early journey of trying to learn piano, because I'm trying to learn some Beatles songs, and I learned, what's it called again? Let It Be. Something I started to learn with piano is how economical it can be. And that's what I find with, like, for example, with Let It Be, you can play not so many chords, but with so little movements, you can change chords with inversions,
Right.
etc.
Yeah.
And that's something I find really fascinating with piano, especially having been a guitar player for so long. It
Oh,
makes you rethink music,
yeah. Yeah. Right.
right?
Definitely. The piano, I mean, the layout is so different, right? On the
Mm,
piano, because like when you play a C major chord, it's one way, and you play a D flat major chord, it's a whole different position. So really everything you go for is in a different place, and whereas in an instrument like the guitar, you play a bar chord and you just move it up and C, D flat, all the
mm,
bar chord, all the chords are the same in that regard. So there's a really big difference conceptually how their instruments are laid out
mm,
to the point where music is made, uh, you know, from an architectural kind of viewpoint, as well as from an oral kind of space. Like I work with musicians that are more like, okay, I'll create this shape on the guitar. And that shape is the first consideration. And then the sound of the shape, well, it sounds cool if I do da 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 da. So
mm,
it's interesting because on the piano, you can't really think like that. I mean, you could maybe in a way, but it's not quite the same.
mm,
So, and the piano, funny enough, like the piano is always, when I think about it, was the perfect instrument for me because I'm more about like I have perfect pitch. So I kind of hear the pitch in my head and my hand goes to that note. And that's something on a piano where it's very visual. You're playing, is you see the shape of things. On a guitar, it's not so much like that. There's not as much visual information. Maybe the dots on the fretboard can give you some, but it's more about remembering the sound of the interval, learning the intervals, remembering the sound of them. And that's more like almost like a relative pitch kind of idea.
Right.
But a perfect pitch, a person is more, I think, in general, maybe more visual.
Right.
I don't know.
When did you discover you had the perfect pitch? Was when you started out, like as a kid?
Yeah, when I was very young, I was studying with a teacher that we were going to a lot of concerts. He was taking me to a lot of concerts to see orchestras, and somehow it came up. I didn't know, of course, what it was or that having perfect pitch was any different than anybody else or anything like that. So I kind of, in discussion, and I realized that I was pointing out to my teacher, oh, that note's a G, and he was like, oh, you've heard perfect pitch. I was like, oh, I guess. And so I remember there's a little bit of adjustment time. It's funny because I don't know if everybody goes through this, but for me, there was a little bit of adjustment time where I could always tell what note a piano played, probably because it was my instrument. But then, like with strings or something like that, I had to learn a little bit, like listen to it and go, oh, okay, yeah, all right, just kind of put the pieces together in my head.
Right. Is that because it's less precise?
I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Maybe, I mean, that is a good point. It's like those instruments have different kinds of harmonics. One funny thing about perfect pitch, I don't know, also know if other people experience this that have perfect pitch. Probably, everybody's different. I noticed that when I'm working like with John Petrucci, my guitar player in Dream Theater, and he plays very low on the fretboard and very crunchy or distorted sounds, it's really hard to tell what note it is. Like, like
Yeah.
I have perfect pitch, but I can't even tell what note you're playing. But he's just playing a note, but it's just low and distorted. It must be just because there's so many overtones and so many things. It's just my mind is trying to kind of make sense of all the frequencies that are part of that, and it's not easy.
No, I can imagine. But that's also what makes distortion so interesting. Is because you can create all these harmonics, and it can be, I guess, even, uneven. It can be all kinds.
Right, exactly. And
You
it's
know.
also a sound. It's an interesting sound color. It's more a color than anything else. I always tell the story of when we were writing the song "Dark Eternal Night," and he emerged from the back room where he was working with his tone, and he had created the beginning part of that song. I don't know if you know it, but it's kind of
No, I
like
don't.
it has this very low, aggressive, and he started to play it, and I thought, oh, that's really cool, but I have no idea what notes you're playing.
Right.
But it sounded really cool.
Yeah.
So
I need to check that song out. What was it called again?
it was about Dark Eternal Night.
Right. I'll
Yeah.
remember that.
So check it out.
But that's actually something I wanted to ask you, like, because obviously Dream Theater, you have obviously big heavy guitars from John, and obviously there's vocals, there's obviously drums and bass too. So how do you think about fitting your parts in? Because with the keyboard, the synth, whatever you are putting to the song, it's easy to maybe get stuck in the same octave as whoever, so how do you try to structure parts?
That's always a good question, a good thing for people to think about when they're making music is how do you separate the parts? How do you give space? First of all, John Petrucci's guitar is as big as a house. It's a huge sound, and he often double tracks it, which means it's tremendous. So you think from that perspective that there's not that much space left, right? But there's drums and there's bass and there's vocals and there's keyboards. But, honestly, we've gotten over the years, I think we've gotten better and better at making that space. I mean, I think there's things he does with his guitars, like maybe he's not, I'm not quite sure, but I'll just say that there are things that the engineer does to make the guitars sound great, with consideration of the mix. So yes, it still is really big, but there's going to be keyboard parts as well. But we've gotten really good at finding things that really work with the guitar. Like one approach that I'll take is I have a whole bank of patches that I've created over the years that work really well with the guitar. Like if I'm doubling the guitar, they're like heavy sounds and they double the guitar, but they're not sounds where you go, oh, that's the keyboardist. You wouldn't even necessarily know. It's a very ego free kind of zone for me because I'm playing a sound that adds dimension to the guitar. Like there's this one sound that almost has a little bit of notoriety. It's called the snarling pig that people talk about. You can kind of hear it in Dream Theater songs. It has a sound. It's a flangey sound that almost like, if you imagine the guitar is kind of like a straight line, the snarling pig is kind of moving around it and creating this cool character to it. And so I have a bunch of things like that work. So that's one approach because we do a lot of unison lines and, everybody wants to play and we want to sound a little bit unique when we do it. But then there's also a lot of big, majestic, epic stuff that happens in Dream Theater. Maybe the strings and voices and French horns and all that stuff. And to do that, the way that I go about orchestrating, and this is something I learned also through the years, is, most keyboard players are playing like that. They're just playing their big chord and it's just there and that's what they do. But I've had to take a more orchestrational approach to my, Dream Theater orchestrations, where I will literally record like the melody line of the strings with one sound that's almost like I'll use like a string virtual instrument that's, all the violins playing a beautiful like legato kind of tone, and I'll use that to express the melody, and then I'll use a different sound to express the high part of the strings, knowing that the melody is highlighted with another different library. And then if I feel like I want to add some boom, boom, low stuff as well, I'll put that on another track. And that way the mixer has the flexibility to really work with that. He might say, that's just too much, or I want it to be this way. So by doing that, we give the flexibility, and things often, they always end up sounding better that way. Especially this trick of offering the melody line, even if it's a chord, as a separate line, if it's important that it comes through. Because there's no way that, you do audio engineering, and if you put up a whole keyboard chord, it's very different than if you can take out the top of it and just have that be heard. So things like that are are really important. And then being very conscious of effects as well. You always hear engineers say, can you give me a little less reverb or something like that, or there's that. And another part of it is that a lot of times when I'm doing like chordal things, like even pads or what I call my progressive kind of patches, I'll EQ them so that they don't have a lot of sound. Like a lot of keyboard sounds just have a lot of low end in them because they're programmed to be enjoyed just by playing them. So when you go into a music store, you're playing through the patches, you want to have each sound have body and depth. But when you're playing in a band where the guitar player is like, sound, you don't need to have that as part of your keyboard sound. It's just pushing the lows too much. So very often, even if it's a mellow pad or a progressive sounding keyboard patch, I will EQ it so that I get rid of some of the low energy and just keep the part that needs to come through, and maybe even tweak it a little bit in, 2 to 5K, just give it a little. Most rock musicians don't hear very well in that frequency anyway, so you give a little push, and then everybody's happy.
Get some bites, yeah.
Yes, bite.
But do you have like some talking harmonically? Is there always something you tend to do? Let's just say for the sake of it, there's a guitar line, maybe not a riff, but more like a line. Let's say like a melodic line.
Yeah.
And you double it. Let's say, do you always do like unison, like you said before, or do you always tend to harmonize those melody lines in a certain way, or do you have an approach for that, or is it a song by song basis?
Um, with Dream Theater, there's definitely approaches that we take that will be used from album to album or song to song. Like, there's a lot of times in verses where the guitar is just doing like a chunky kind of thing, almost on a repeated note, da 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 da, in some rhythm. That's a metal Dream
Yeah,
Theater
yeah.
thing, if you will, and it's done in different ways. And that's just almost like a standard fare, dare I say, for like
Wow.
for a group like Dream Theater or for Dream Theater. And when we do that, I mean, the idea is that there are, they're going to be chords over it, right? It's going to have chords. We know that. I'm not going to sit there and go da 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 with a keyboard. So I'm going to find interesting chords. So in that sense, that's one of the formulas that
Wow.
we
Right.
might take where, okay, I'm doing this kind of thing. But then, of course, it expands from there and it gets very wide open. And what I mean by that is that, if John Petrucci starts playing something linear, some kind of a line that's moving, yeah, I could join him with that. But I could also compose chords around that line that fit into some rhythmical context, or just sit in a certain way on the track. Or I could do things like, maybe, what, I'll say, that was a really cool line, let's put it like in the treble, let's put it as a higher voice and then put something else underneath it. So we start using compositional techniques to kind of expand on whatever ideas we had. We're very classical in that sense. We take a motif and we'll use it in different ways,
Right.
which is always really fun. We do that, is I kind of refer to like the liquid tension stuff that I do, because that's also used in that kind of musical context where we'll take something and all of a sudden it appears in my right hand and then it's in the left hand with chords over it. And then it turns into a honky tonk thing, whatever. So just taking
Yeah.
just taking whatever it is and having fun with it and getting the most out of it.
Right. But let's say you have a melody line. Is there always, or do you always use the same approach? Maybe this is the wrong question or stupid question, but do you tend to use the same approach when creating chords for a melody line? Like you say, do you always look at the first note? Oh, this is the tonic, let's say, and that's going to be always this chord, or do you approach it differently?
um, Let me understand. So you're asking if when we have a melody, how I kind of think about the chords that go with
Yeah,
it?
yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
much better way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, there's no set way um, there's no set way to think about that. Although a melody will kind of begin to give you information about what could possibly happen harmonically. And what I mean is that, let's say you have the first four notes of the melody, and it's the notes C, E, A, and G. It's like da ba ba ba, and then you go, oh, okay, so there's some kind of C major going on. Probably, I mean, you could do anything. Of course, you can make it atonal with that melody, but if you want to kind of keep it in the tonal range, and your first note is a C, there's a pretty good chance that you probably land on play a C chord at that point. Or you could play an A minor chord or whatever, something that uses those notes that you constructed, and they want to have some, like, looking for some relationship there. So based on whatever information and how the melody is moving, that's how I would come up with my chords,
Right,
right? But when I'm
right, right, right.
composing, a lot of times when I'm composing, the chords will either come at the same time as the melody, or the melody comes a little later. With Dream Theater, very often the exact melody comes later.
Right. Yes, it's super fascinating because I'm myself at the point where I'm trying to learn more vocal melodies, like on guitar or piano. It doesn't really matter, but and that made me realize, oh, actually, the first note of a melody, let's say, it doesn't always have to be the root note of the chord. Like
Mm.
the first note for example, it can be the
It doesn't
third, it
have
can be
to
the
be
fifth, Yeah, exactly.
anything. Yeah.
Because I think I always started my melodies with the root note of the first chord. I
That's the
don't think
most
I,
common, that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
most common
yeah.
way to do it.
Yeah.
But there's no rules
No,
in that.
exactly. It's fascinating that
Yeah, right.
what you can do and how you think about it. And
Sure, sure.
yeah, yeah.
But you kind of range from looking at what is the most like, common way or tonal way you could do this.
Hmm.
What would like a jazz musician do with this,
Yeah,
right? Then your
yeah,
chords could
yeah.
get very interesting. What would you do if you were a 12-tone composer? This was the beginning of your series.
Hmm.
It's totally
Right.
open.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Um, Something I'd love to ask you is obviously Dream Theater, you and your other projects, there's fast parts, and I know you when you improvise with each other, you also are able to do really fast lines,
Right.
and that's something I'm not that skilled. I don't think my brain can be able to think about. Oh, I got to go there and I got to do it this way.
Yeah.
So how do you think about creating fast lines if you do it spontaneously? Like how does that present yourself in your mind first before
Mm.
you're able to play it? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it does. Let's see. So, first of all, the way that music is made is, as we know, can be complicated, and everybody has a different approach. But for me, through all the years of training at the piano, I've developed, a certain technique which includes a lot of patterns. Let's think of it as like, a keyboard player is going to learn how to play scales, right? In all different keys or whatever keys. Let's say I learned how to play. Well, actually, looking at it from a more limited perspective will allow us to understand maybe a little bit how this works. Let's say you learned an A minor blues scale, and you learned, a C kind of like major scale, and you play them really, really well. When you sit at the piano, if you're going to come up with something fast, the only things that will probably come up that you'll play are that A minor thing or the C scale. There's nothing else fast that you're going to really be able to do unless you sit there and maybe write it out slowly or just, take a week to like compose it.
Hmm.
Or figure out some other thing that you can play. So what I'm saying is that that the lines that are written are kind of they come about from this kind of like technical connection between your brain and like my hand. Like somebody who just sits we're not talking about somebody who just sits in front of a computer and types in a melody. You're talking about Dream Theater and me and how I might come up. It's very much based on this kind of like building of a foundation or a library of riffs and patterns and scales. And like I could sit at the piano right now and go, and I'm thinking shapes, but my fingers have gone into a lot of those things before. If I'm playing inversions, I've practiced inversions, I can do that. If I'm playing scales, I can do that. And that means I can then mix them up so that I can go start with a scale and then go into an inversion and maybe start with another scale. Not to say that it's not an inventive process, because it is, because then I have to say, okay, well, how many times am I going to do this little inversion riff before I break into the scalier thing, before it goes into a chromatic thing, and before it goes into some wild jumping octaves thing. So there's a lot of creation involved, but I could sit and improvise and play really fast lines where you'd be going like, how did you conceive of that so fast? But the reason that I did is because my fingers have been trained and are connected with my brain to do these patterns. It's almost like the other part that I find really interesting is like there's certain funny, like we were saying on the piano, everything is in a different position. so I do this exercise where I'll like take like a C dominant seventh chord and I'll move to a D flat dominant seventh chord, like root position and then root position again. And then I'll move to the next possible C7 chord going up, which would start on E in this case, right? And all the notes follow. And then the next possible D flat seven, and then keep going and keep finding the next possible inversion. So your hand is really moving in all these interesting ways. And then you add like the left hand. But then what I like to do is I like to carry it further and further to see how far I can take this and how like almost like smart my hands can be. And so, and it's not that I'm any particular kind of rocket scientist at all, but what I've noticed has happened for me at the piano. I mean, this is after like 57 years of playing the piano, but I can play like, that what I was just talking about, like in a mirrored position and talk to you at the same time. Like, and you kind of go, and my fingers are just kind of doing this funny thing where they're moving because it's not that much movement. There's just different amounts of movement between the notes. And how is it really happening? It's almost like the fingers have a brain in themselves, like, because if I'm talking to you and I'm doing this at the same time, like, what's really going on? Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's bizarre. I don't even understand it myself. So there's some interesting thing happening to where the fingers, it's like somewhat, I guess it's muscle memory that comes into play and patterns that you've played. I'm not quite sure how it works, but people think that music is like making music and doing all these cool things that people react to, like playing fast or, doing cool chord changes or whatever is like magic, right? Oh, this guy just does that. It's like out of the blue. He just, landed on the planet and he's just doing that. And it's like, well, oh my God. Well, I'm here to tell people that, yeah, music has a magical element to it. And there are people with a lot of talent, but it also takes a hell of a lot of work. Anybody you see going sat there and figured out a bunch of stuff before they could make that happen. It's not coming from nowhere, even like to be able to maintain your cool while you're playing, like, all this crazy stuff. That might be more than just like piano skills. That might be some skill that they learned in meditation or in some kind of like exercise or something along the way that allows them to be in control, because there's a lot of control that has to happen when you're playing like difficult passages. First of all, if you're insecure, which is a personality trait, then how are you going to deliver what you need to deliver in a consistent and positive kind of like way? It's not going to happen because it's so interesting the way that you can't disconnect who you are as a person to who you are as a musician. Unfortunately, there's so many things that come together, especially when it comes time to like perform, because performance is, getting in front of people or even in front of a camera and being able to deliver, everything that you are in a way that satisfies the audience and also satisfies yourself. So that's something like I'm always working on. Like, can I deliver under pressure what I can do when I'm just in my room by myself? And that is, yes, work at the piano, but it's also work in other ways. I was working with a guy who does like exercise, but also blends in some like yoga type stuff with it. And there was this one kind of exercise we were doing, and it was really helping me a lot because I was feeling like when I was playing really difficult stuff that was like going on and on and on, and I had to not fall off the rails, as they might say, but keep it going and not make a mistake. I was feeling like that training outside of playing the piano was really helping me.
Right.
So I don't know, it's a long answer to your question.
No.
That's
That's
made me think.
super interesting. But so to reach your level, what has your practice routine been like?
Yeah.
Has it stayed the same since Juilliard, or has it changed as you have changed as a person?
Yeah, it's definitely changed because I don't have the kind of like consistent time that I used to have. Like I'm, not in the pandemic period, but I was always on tour a lot. Can't practice when you're on planes, trains, and automobiles all day, as much as you want to.
Mm.
But also even at home when I'm just in my own space and it's not touring, it's not as consistent. I prefer to think of it as when I do sit down to practice, that I know more about how to get the results that I want to get. Like one of the tips, like that could help everybody out there is that, and none of this stuff is that fun to do. Is you're practicing something. First of all, one of the tips would be to try to stay creative when you're practicing, to do things that are, you don't have to just play the Hanon exactly, the way it is. Think of how, change it up a little bit, put your own, change it to 7/8 time, or do something to make it interesting. Um, but yeah, so, certain fingers when you're playing piano or guitar are weaker than other ones. So it makes sense to think about they need a little bit more exercise to be able to be even with, if you're going da 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 da, you're not going to go da 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 da, stop
Yeah.
and like have a really light note just because your fourth finger doesn't lift up as high. You need that to have some power as well. So one of the tips of practicing is just get to the point, like just work, if you're going to play da 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 da, why not go da 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 da, so you give a little bit more time to the weaker fingers so they become even with the other ones. So things like that are important.
Right. But how have you then like build up, like you said before, you can mirror the two hands, doing that inversion
Yeah,
building thing whilst talking. Is that just pure repetition?
this is practice. Yeah,
Right.
it's totally practice. It's the same thing as like I'll do this thing that I enjoy doing. I learned it from Keith Emerson, actually. It's kind of like an ostinato idea, where you're going playing something in the left hand and then talking to you, or playing chopsticks in the right hand. Well, this is just remaining like consistent. That's something that takes work. You think of it like, what I recommend is for a beginning student, somebody who's just trying it for the first time, why not just go like C, G, C, G, C, dum, bum, 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 and just repeat that at whatever tempo. While it's repeating evenly, try talking to your friend, or try playing something, in the right hand against it, but keep that consistent. But the work that's involved is to first play that enough times in your left hand that it becomes like second nature, right? No matter, for me, it might be something that's a little bit more complicated. Like I'm doing these things that are in 11/8 time. And I try to do that while I'm maybe banging out quarter notes, but try to do this and it wraps around in a different place. It all is like, where are you at and how can you break through to the other side of that. But the idea is that it takes a lot of patience. I was taking some lessons with a wonderful Carnatic musician from India, and that's a whole different system. And hey, when I started to do that, it's hard, because I don't do that all the time. So I was starting from a more beginning place because it's rhythm. I'm good with rhythm, but I don't think, that's not the way I was brought up. So you got to slow down and understand, okay, what is it, and then just kind of wrap your head around it and practice. And yeah,
So how? I mean,
bad news. Yeah, it takes time.
yeah, definitely. But like going back to when you were young, maybe during Juilliard, even after, because growing up as a fan of rock music and rock musicians, it was often that you came across hearing about people who practice 18 hours a day or
Yeah.
16. I don't know if that's possible, but
Yeah.
were you one of those who also dedicated like that amount of hours, or
Enormous hours. Yeah. I would practice, between 3-4 hours a day every
Right.
day when I was a kid. Yeah, I had to. 'Cause Juilliard and having to play classical music and concerts and all that kind of stuff demanded that I have to keep this music really, in shape, because there are concerts coming up where this difficult music had to be played. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, man.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually miss sitting down and practicing for hours and then too. That was more in the past,
Yeah, I understand.
unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
But something I love to ask you, because I know you joined Dream Theater like around 98, I guess, 99, is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. I guess 98 is when I said
Yeah.
yes. 99 was the first album.
Right, yeah, exactly. But so what was your career before that? Because I know you play with different bands. You had your solo music, I believe.
Yeah,
But what was your what was your professional life like then before joining
yeah.
Dream Theater?
Well, I was a male stripper before that. No, I'm kidding. You're like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah.
uh,
Perhaps.
Not
Could be
quite.
could be the case.
You don't know. Just finding. That's why you're asking, right? Like, what
Yeah,
the hell?
exactly, exactly.
What were you doing? Oh, and
Yeah.
also, I should probably go. And I have a 12 o'clock thing, so I should prepare for that soon.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah, sure.
have questions, but yeah. So I've always been playing music, and before I joined Dream Theater, I was doing the same. Uh, I guess to make a longer story kind of short. So when I first left Juilliard at 19, I didn't really know exactly how I was going to make that transition. It was a little awkward because I was very much in this very, focused classical space and entering a world I really knew nothing about. All I knew is I wanted to get out of the classical space and go play some cool things on synthesizers and all
Right.
that. So had a lot of experiences, things like I worked for a computer company that was doing music, helping them kind of like with some musical ideas. I toured around with bands that were playing like high school proms and dances and, young bands. And I wore a silver cape and, I did that to support myself. And I made a record early on. The first record I made was with a group called Speedway Boulevard. It was on Epic Records when I was in my early 20s. I played with the Paul Winter Consort. It was a kind of a new age world music organization. And obviously, one can look at my resume and all the different people that I played with. But I guess my point and the answer to the question is, my career, I got started doing things, but it didn't really solidly get into motion until a little later in my life. One of the things that I did that helped me to get really going and solid was I worked for first Korg, the company that makes synthesizers, as a product specialist. Somebody who would go around and do clinics on the synthesizers and make sounds for the synthesizers and all that kind of stuff. That really helped me because I would use that position to go and play like at all the music trade shows. And then that would allow people to see me play and kind of was able to learn a lot more about synthesizers and become really aware and interested in the world of manufacturing musical instruments, which led me to many of the things I do now with my company, Wisdom Music. So yeah, I mean, slowly but surely, gradually, things kind of fell into place. And I guess things really started to roll about the time I was playing, with the Paul Winter Consort and with Rod Morgenstein and the Dregs and Liquid Tension then, and then, of course, Dream Theater for the last 22 years.
Yes, fascinating. I mean, I guess patience is very important to practice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, life is strange. Everybody has a very individual path. You
Hmm.
know, I started to work for Korg when I was 32 years old. So even then, my career wasn't really happening, but I had a very unusual path. I was told not even to talk to musicians who weren't playing classical music because they weren't like at my level, like they're like bums or hippies or like,
Right, right,
I had to
right.
literally get over this almost like hypnosis. And even though I liked all that now, I was still told not to speak to any of them, like lower life forms or something. And that's not the case. There's amazing people in the world of, outside of classical music. So, it took some adjusting and some fine tuning how I would take who I am and interface with the world. And I still work on that, because I'm not a standard, like pop musician or whatever. I do all kinds of things that are a little bit outside of the mainstream. I mean, Dream Theater is very popular, but still, even Dream Theater is not. It's a rock band and it's got keyboards in it, and it's a great thing. But I still figure, how do I take my talent and how do I use it effectively? And I'll
Right.
be doing that probably to my last day on the planet, which
Yeah,
is, I
yeah,
guess,
yeah.
because we're always trying to figure out how to use our creativity and our minds and really express ourselves in as comfortable and as powerful way as possible.
Right. Yeah. Well, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Jordan, I know you got to go. I don't want to take too much of your time here, but thank you again for taking your time. First of all, I really appreciate talking to you.
Awesome. Nice to talk to you too. Thanks for asking
Awesome.
questions that had me really thinking in a different way. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jordan, for coming on. Real pleasure talking to you, and hope you, the listener or watcher, enjoyed it as well. Let me know in the comments what you think, or send me an email. Let me know what you think of which guests you want to see next. Just leave a comment, send an email, and also please subscribe to the channel, whether that's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Leave a rating if you can. Hit the like button if you can. Obviously, it depends which platform you're watching or listening to this show. Your support really matters, and we're growing slowly but steadily. And that's all thanks to you. So I really appreciate your support. And if you want to get exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below. Just send your name and email address, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. But that's it. I didn't say it's free, but yeah, it's free, of course, to join the Audio Tribe email list. But that's it for this week. Real pleasure having you here as always. And I will see you next week again. So take care and see you soon.